Welcome to the Blooming League of Original Podcasts.
Hey there, and welcome to an all-new, long-awaited, much-needed Aussie-less edition of Thrash and Treasure, the torture chamber musical comedy podcast where the rats went away so the cats will play. And speaking of rats, Aaron's not here this week, but I'm Spencer, and this week the EGOT has landed, and the training wheels are off, because I'm joined, as usual, by my Jersey-born co-host, who went for a swim on the shore and washed up in Australia. It's Matt the Quizmaster.
Hey there. Yes, of course, Aaron. Yes, it's going to bring up that I was born in New Jersey.
Hey, my mom's from New Jersey, so we can't insult it too much.
I grew up in Massachusetts. I was born in New Jersey. I think I moved when I was 3 months old. Actually, my mother was pregnant with me when she found the house, and my dad gave her pretty much one day to find a house. And then we moved to Massachusetts.
I was born in Massachusetts, funnily enough.
Were you?
I was like, oh, I was born in Boston, and we moved to Chicago when I was 2.
Well, there you go.
So just for all you listeners, Aaron is here. He's just gagged and bound, so we can get a word in for a change. And because we've never hosted without him before, the show will be much better now. So guess what, Matt?
What?
We have a returning legendary diva stuck in the middle of zombie high today. And after leaving his footprint 65 million episodes ago, he's in for another future shock. Because this straight white male won a Writers Guild Award for putting words in a lesbian's mouth with Ellen. But that's the trouble with normal when you're used to putting thoughts in Herman's head that send Grace under fire when she's better off Ted. Not like Jake in Progress with Dr. Ken Bob Patterson, who Roseanne let him know that the O'Neills are real, Mary is imaginary, Dog is Shaggy, and a Richter who controls the universe. So whilst I'm breaking in as host, please help me Charlie Foxtrot up Thunder Alley, a huge American howdy, but don't ask, just break the rules of engagement for this genius comedy writer who rode lawyers and other briefs before The Big Bang Theory left him speechless, but luckily still standing, like the last man standing. So before we go extinct by recycling too many jokes on this sports night, please help me welcome back to our torture chamber, Fluffy Shop, this Velociraptor writer, producer, actor, and narrator who schooled us aliens in America in how to chow down on prehistory with the much-beloved dinosaurs. So before we get eaten, let's make sure the kids are all right and say a few Irish Catholic prayers for this hilarious genius. It's Sir Tim Doyle. Yay, welcome back.
Hi, quite a nice introduction. He managed to work in most of my credits there, so you don't even have to go to IMDb now. If you listen closely, you'll know a lot of the things that I've been involved in.
Did we leave anything out?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to peruse, but I mean, I've got a long and storied career working in the half-hour television comedy business. I've worked with a lot of big stars on a lot of well-regarded sitcoms, and some more obscure and less well-regarded, and some that are hidden gems that if you found out about them and you managed to track them down on one of your streaming services, you might really enjoy yourself. But they didn't quite enter popular culture in a big way. I also heard the names of several of my failed pilots in there, which I don't think anyone kept a copy of. I mean, I may have an old DVD or a VHS copy in my cupboard over there. But most of them, well, some of them are maybe best left unre-examined. So.
Have you been getting a good amount of sunburn from protesting so much?
Well, I'm pretty pink right now. I don't know if you can tell, but I come from blue-skinned Irish Catholic stock. So I try to wear a big fedora and a certain amount of sunscreen whenever I go out into the Southern California sun. But what are we, 50 days into or more into the strike? Yeah, about 53, 54 days into the strike right now. And I tried to do my duty and get out there at least 3 times a week for 3 or 4 hours. Marching back and forth in front of one of the studios, trying to intimidate them.
And we've been hearing from a lot of people who are on the lines who've just been like running into people left and right that they've worked with during their career. Has that been your experience?
Yes, but I usually bring a book on tape or a podcast with me and use my time walking back and forth to listen to a book or something. I actually have sought out various places. I've tried various different studios. I live in the sort of Culver City area, so I'm very close to Sony. I'm very close to the Culver Studios, which is where Amazon has its headquarters, and I'm right down the street from the Fox studio. So I've tried out each of those, and I took a trip to Burbank to go to Warner Brothers, to pick it at Warner Brothers a couple of times. But I'm trying to find one where I don't know a lot of people, so that the chit chat is minimized, and I can just intensely listen to my pods or my book on tape. There's something about I don't know. I mean, if I was a sociable, gregarious person, I maybe wouldn't have become a writer. I think I'm by nature, I'm trying my best to be, jovial and delightful company for you guys right now. But by nature, I tend to be a little more reserved and kind of want to keep to myself. I was grateful for the pandemic to some extent because it gave me an excuse not to see people and to reinforce my misanthropic impulses.
Brilliant.
Well, so we can start and move on to the metal. And so we have a question that we started asking after your first appearance. What would be your ultimate and your craziest rock star rider? So like, what would you ask for in your dressing room if you were a rock star?
Oh, well, I mean, and I had to perform, because it's like I don't know if I'd want like a lot of heavy carbohydrates or something. If I had to go up on stage and sing and dance, I think I'd want to keep it light. I like Coca-Cola. This is the kind with sugarcane from Mexico. So but that's not crazy enough, right? I mean, I'm supposed to want like hookers and blow, right? Or only yellow M&Ms or something.
I worked on a show in Fiji. I used to live in Fiji, and there was one of the actors had all imported water. So I don't know if you've heard of Fiji water. It's kind of a big thing. Like people drink it around the world for its purity, et cetera, et cetera. But she decided that she needed pallets of this particular bottled artesian water flown in, and so that she could wash her hair, brush her teeth, drink it. And so she wouldn't come to the show unless she had these pallets of this particular water in Fiji.
Now, I haven't looked at the label. Is that bottled Fiji water actually from Fiji?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It was like this guy was walking through the sugarcane field up near Rocky, and sort of like tripped upon this spring, and then was like, "Oh, what's this?" And it's an artesian water that just is. It sort of gets filtered, I think, through the rocks of through the coral, and just pools under the island. So yeah, there's an unlimited supply, or so they say.
Oh, well, that's nice to know. Yeah, people are known to be kind of dopes about their requirements, their personal requirements. I mean, I don't know. Being in a place famous for its great water, I probably would really want to get into it and sample all the different varieties of the water from Fiji. But yeah, my wants and my needs are few. Spencer, I'm a simple man. I think a reasonable amount of unhealthy food and hydration materials would be all I would require backstage before I went out and ripped it up as a hair metal performer.
Well, and so this week our producer picked the metal album, and he picked Killswitch Engage's As Daylight Dies. So I'll start by talking about my opinion, and then we can discuss it. So Aaron picked this album because I kept saying I wanted more real metal, and I apologized for that request because this was too much. This was so much. It was so loud. It was so screamy. It was so metal. I couldn't even tell you there was a song that I was like, oh, I liked that. No, I mean, it was a lot. It was loud all the time. I think my favorite song was The Arms of Sorrow, because at least there was a quiet beginning, and I really enjoyed that couple of seconds of quiet, ethereal music. But this is probably my least favorite one that we've done through so far. Tim, what do you think?
Yes, it wasn't good. I mean, it's yeah, but I'm not the audience for it. I mean, I certainly came of age in an era when there were famous and successful metal bands, and but even then I wasn't a huge fan of the genre. I enjoyed my personal LP library was show tunes and a certain amount, I don't know, a little bit of soft rock and prog rock. Maybe I think I got as heavy as, let's say, Ian Anderson and Jethro Tull. That would be about as on the spectrum. Starting with, let's say, James Taylor on one end and this album on the other. I'm probably, my needle is somewhere in the middle in terms of my own taste and the music I listen to for pleasure. Yes, there was very little pleasure listening to the songs. And I must confess, I skipped around. I got a sampling and there was a sameness to what I was hearing. Yeah, and I couldn't really make out the lyrics. In the old days, you'd get an album and you'd have the lyrics sheet there with you. And you could sit there and kind of decipher the poetry a little bit, kind of, listen to it and try to understand what was attempting to be communicated. And without that, I was a little bit lost there in the screaming and the relentless thudding of this music. So a thumbs down for me, but again, I'm not the intended audience. Is this a popular band? Do they have legions of fans who show up for them in stadiums and stuff?
Yes, they are. This was something like their 5th or 6th album. They play Knotfest, which was just over here, which is this Slipknot thing. I mean, they're a band, they're from Massachusetts, so of course, I have to have some allegiance to them, from Westfield. But I'd have to agree with you. Like, trying to understand what was going on was a little bit challenging. There was a lot of screaming, but then what I found was really funny was when the vocals sort of lightened up, it sort of had this like Dave Matthews Band sort of Hootie and Blowfish sort of tone to the singing, which I thought was absolutely hilarious and interesting. And maybe that's part of their appeal as well, is that and again with the metal, like the rhythm and the guitars, it was just relentless, which I think is probably appealing for a lot of people. Yeah, but again, for me, it's not really my cup of tea. But yeah, they're certainly a popular band.
Are they still very popular?
I think so. I'm not sure.
I looked on Spotify. They have 2.6 million average monthly listeners.
And is this a current album? This is something that they've released recently?
2006.
2006. Oh, so okay. So this would fall into the category of the old stuff that the audience at their concerts begs them to play.
Yes, exactly.
When they try to trot out their new things, the audience is like, "No, play that piece of shit from 2006. We want our money back."
I didn't watch any of the videos, so I mean, maybe their live performances are incredible.
I would assume that there's a great energy at these kind of shows. Spencer, you like heavy metal. You do listen to it. Have you been to concerts?
I do not.
Oh, you do not? Okay.
I do not. I am a avid musical theater fan. That is my expertise. I have some friends who like metal, but it's never really been my thing.
But there's got to be an energy when you've got 40,000 people in a stadium somewhere.
Oh, 100%.
And these guys are up on stage pounding away, just sawing away at their guitars and screaming, and everybody's just going, I mean, there's got to be a crazy, and also you're stoned off your ass.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I think that there's an external reason that you enjoy those concerts, and I don't think it's the music.
Not the subtlety of the lyrics.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, again, if I'd been presented with a song sheet, that kind of had it all laid out, maybe we'd find something sublime in there. Maybe there's a poet hidden behind all the screeching. But I did, and I didn't take the time to do the research and really dig into their stuff. I rather cavalierly said, "Meh, not for me," and walked away.
As you were just saying, this is one of those things where they release new stuff and you don't want to listen to new stuff. Have you had a concert experience like that where a performer's just been playing all their new music and all you want is to hear their old stuff?
Well, sort of. I mean, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago, I went and saw Paul McCartney in Vegas perform live on his most recent tour, and it was great. It was great to see him, and be in proximity to Sir Paul, and to hear him, perform the hits from the Beatles and from the Wings era, which I went to a Wings concert in 1970, when I was a young man, and at the I think it was here at the Inglewood Forum, it was a great night and a big show and just wonderful. And so I know those songs. I knew just about everything he played, but periodically he would stop and say, "Okay, you don't want to hear this, but it's pretty good. I'm going to play it anyway." And he's rich enough that he basically doesn't even apologize. He just sort of like, "Guys, you're going to sit here. I'm going to play the new stuff and you're going to hear it." And he has, he had kind of a great sense of humor about it. But then he would play, Yesterday, he'd start strumming the opening chords of Yesterday, and people would lose their shit and just, go into spasms and fall down having a fit, So He tried to balance it out, but he was well aware that, and I've been to a lot of concerts where that's the case, where, you go to whatever, you go to see Elton and you want to hear the old songs. You don't want to hear something that he just pulled out of his butt, this morning.
I a couple years ago got to see the band Styx, and so they've released I think 2 albums in the past couple of years, and they were playing a bunch of stuff from it, and it was good. I really liked the new stuff, but I was like, I don't give a shit about the new stuff. I want to hear Come Sail Away and Mr. Roboto and all those things. But of course, then I was like, oh, I like the new stuff, and started listening to the new stuff also. That wasn't why people were there.
Yeah,
and it's the same thing with Paul McCartney. It's even more so not why people are there.
The Chili Peppers.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked at this, but does Paul? I mean, Paul had an album out. He was touring in support of his album, as one does, or as one at least traditionally did. And I didn't Spotify the album. I didn't download it or whatever. And so, but the songs that he played were delightful. I mean, he's a great composer. I mean, so if you liked Styx back then, and they probably are more seasoned as musicians now, they probably actually might have something to offer. I'm not sure about this band, the hair band or the heavy metal band that we're talking about here, but maybe. And if I had the time and inclination, I might research them a little bit more. But nobody in my circle really listens to this kind of music. So I think if I was here at the house playing it, at least aloud, my wife would become disturbed and she would probably make some phone calls. And my daughter, who would also, they wouldn't know what was up with Dad, and they'd be sure that I'm having some kind of a breakdown.
Speaking of disturbing,
before we get to our musical theater, if you just want to talk a little bit more about the strike, what is it exactly that the WGA is on strike for? What are their demands, that sort of thing, for people who might not necessarily know why they have been on strike for so long?
Yeah, the strike is very important. I mean, we did one 15 years ago, and I was involved there. And the nature of capitalism, it's always going to be that the bosses, the people who are in charge at the studios and now the streaming services, are intent on concentrating as much of the profits from these projects into their own hands and not distributing it to the people who do the creative work all the way up and down the line. That's the nature of any business enterprise. It's about money. And in recent years, the disruptors from Silicon Valley have invaded the entertainment business to a great extent. So, the ethos in Silicon Valley has always been sort of anti-union and hostile to the workers in terms of trying to extract as much labor out of them for as little as they possibly can. And, the labor situation in Hollywood since the 1940s has been pretty good. There were a series of strikes in the 30s, 40s, 50s, that set the table. And there's a pushback from the new people who are running Amazon and Netflix and that they rejiggered the situation so that writers are not getting to enjoy the benefit of the work that they create, and the actors and directors and the crew people as well. I've run a number of TV shows over the years, and the new regime coming in is, it's always a battle, to get as much money as you can to share with the people on your crew, to have they'll fight you to the death to have that second wardrobe assistant that you need on the set so that things move more quickly, who is making very little money, and yet then the bosses will get on their private jet and spend $400,000 to cross the country a couple of times to go to a fancy party or something for themselves. The perquisites of the people at the top are just so removed from the money that is being distributed to people down the line. And the writers, it always seems that it falls to the writers to hold the line on this stuff, because I think of the different unions involved in making television movies, the writers tend to be the crankiest and maybe the smartest, but we end up fighting these battles every 10 or 15 years, and then the benefit of the fight trickles down to everybody else in the industry. Again, for example, back in the 60s, the writers didn't get residuals for the work they did. You have to, it made me think of it in these terms. It's like if you write a book, if you write a novel, a piece of fiction, it has your name on it. You own that. That is your creative work. And if I want to make a movie out of it, or make a hat out of it, or a cartoon show, or anything else, I have to pay you forever. You own that. That's your creative work work. Or if we write a play, in the Dramatists Guild, the playwright is preeminent, and you can't change a word of the play, you can't mess it up, you can't do productions of it without paying them. In the TV and the movie business, we traded that right of ownership, that right of authorship that is built into the work we do. We've traded that away for what's called residuals, for subsequent payments. You'll produce our show, the show that we want to do, and you the studio will get the ancillary rights. If you guys want to fire our ass and make the show without us, you can do it. If you guys want to do a reboot, which is what people do, they can do it, and the original writer may or may not even get to participate financially. So one of the things that we're definitely seeing is that these new streaming services and the trend in the studio system is to roll back on the residuals and basically try to do like what they call buyouts, where they basically give you a set amount of money up front, and then you don't own this anymore. So I did a show that was based on my childhood, and basically I gave that to the Walt Disney Company, and it's my story about the people in my family and this kind of stuff. It no longer belongs to me. It belongs to the Walt Disney Company. So that's a fine transaction that you make knowingly, but part of the deal is that you get treated with respect, and you get a certain share of the money. And the lot of the writer in Hollywood has, again, I'm being long-winded, but the lot of the writer in Hollywood has gotten a lot worse just in the last 5 or 6 years. For the 30 years I've been doing TV, most of the time in network TV, you would do a season of a show could be 22, 24, 26 episodes of television, and writers get paid per episode. So you would make a certain amount of money per episode, and that would add up to a decent life for writers. Even writers who weren't superstar writers, would have a decent living. They have a middle-class living. They'd be able to survive in LA or New York with that money that they made working 22 episode seasons. Well, Netflix does 6 or 8 episode seasons, and they've had holds on writers, preventing them from working on other shows. So suddenly you've cut in thirds, what a writer's income is for a year. And, they're negotiating the releases so that people could go work on a second show. But the point is that then you have to scramble and find a second show to keep yourself occupied for the other 8 months out of the year. And they've done a lot of things like that. They basically, they employ writers like for terms of like 10 weeks on a show. That's it. They work for 10 weeks on the show, and the rest of the year they're on their own. They have to go and find other work. They're limiting the number of writers in a writer's room. I mean, when I was on the Roseanne show, it was ridiculous, but we had like 20 writers on that show. And a lot of that was just, Roseanne was crazy, and she would meet somebody on a bus and say, come write for my show, But so in addition to the sort of silly, strange people that you brought in as writers on the show, there was a core of 8 or 10 really solid writers who carried the ball on that show from season to season, from episode to episode. And they were very necessary. But they have these writing staffs now where they're like 4 writers on the show, and that's all they'll let you have. They won't give you the money to hire additional people. So, so those are the 2 main points I think that the Writers Guild is concerned about, is the size of writing staffs and the compensation down the line for, the subsequent use of the material, and a little bit of respect for that stuff. But I mean, the same thing applies, to actors. I mean, if you're the middle class of the acting community has been gutted. Yes, sure, Tom Cruise is going to get $100 million for this movie that he did or whatever. There's always going to be those guys. But I know lots of actors who are the guy you hired to come in and play the cop in the scene, the funny person that you've worked with a million times who's going to play the waiter or the substitute teacher or whatever. Those people are barely getting by, and a lot of them are driving Uber cars and working at other gigs because they've turned acting and writing and to some extent directing into a gig job where you can't really make the living that you once did off of it. So, the directors have settled. They're a different thing. Directors a lot of the time are in a weird way closer to the studios and the networks than the other people involved in make TV and movie. But the actors could still go on strike. They're going to be voting by the end of the month whether they will go out on strike. If they go out on strike, then that's a big deal because we will shut down production. There won't be new shows coming from America. So viewers won't notice. I mean, again, I don't know how exposed you are to American television and stuff, but the Jimmy Kimmels and and those guys aren't on the air right now. Those those shows went down immediately because those shows are topical. When Stephen Colbert comes out on stage, he wants to tell jokes about what's going on in the world. So without writers, he's shut down for now. But it's going to be a few months before people really notice that, oh, my favorite cop show or my favorite sitcom or my favorite lawyer show or doctor show doesn't have new episodes on in September like we expected them to. So it could be a long haul on this strike because we have to wait for the studios and the streaming services to feel the pain of not having this product that we generate for it. So it could be a while, but I think it will be helpful if the actors vote to strike as well, because they can still go and produce some of the scripts that have already been written, and there are some shows that are still in production. But we've done a pretty good job shutting down production. I mean, what's great is the craft unions and the Teamsters have been pretty good about not crossing our picket line. So if we're picketing at a studio or at a location where they're shooting, the trucks will turn around and go away, and and shut down production for that day. And we've done a lot of that in LA and in New York and a few other places too. So anyway, I know that was long-winded, but that's kind of my current take on where we're at. I think it could easily go until like November or December, or it could get settled very quickly. And I think it's more likely to get settled quickly if the actors decide to strike as well, because that will really intensify things from the perspective of those studio and streaming bosses.
Anyways, it looks like Daylight has died on another metal album, so we're gonna get ready for a night out.
G'day listeners, Aaron here. We thought we'd better send a spy to Broadway to check out the shows for us. So here for today's review is our Broadway spy, Spencer.
This week we're going to be talking about The Cottage, the new comedy on Broadway. This play is written by Sandy Rustin and directed by the incredible Jason Alexander of Seinfeld fame. This cast is incredible, consisting of Laura Bell Bundy from Legally Blonde, Lily Cooper, who recently has been in POTUS and Tootsie on Broadway, and you have Eric McCormick of Will and Grace fame, Nahal Joshi, who was in the closing company of Phantom of the Opera, Alex Moffat from Saturday Night Live, and Dana Steingold from Beetlejuice. This cast is crazy. This show is so funny with an incredibly intricate set that just every time you look at it, you notice something new. This farce, I mean, that's what it is. It's a farce. Is so funny and smart and well done. This cast is really at the top of their game. And with this incredible direction by Jason Alexander, who truly knows how to be a comedic actor from his many years on Seinfeld and knows physical comedy. I mean, this show has a lot of physical comedy, and what he does with the direction in it is just fantastic. Some really cool costumes as well, with some really fantastic hair and wig design and some little slight changes to the company's togetherness over the course of the run. Is just seeing how much fun that they have on this stage. This cast is so incredible. You have until October 29th to see this wonderful, hilarious play on Broadway. You're listening to Crash and Treasure. I'm Spencer, that's Matt, and we're joined by a returning guest, as the French call him, Timothée Doyle, but we know him as Tim Doyle.
Yeah. I don't know if you know that the ballet dancers in Australia held the curtain on Friday night from Aussie Ballet, because there's been no negotiation since before COVID. And so we're seeing it with the writer's strike, and we're starting to see it with performers as well. And yeah, so I'm really curious. I'm a SAGaftra member, so I'm curious to see how that's all going to play out as well.
Yeah, it's exciting, and we appreciate the support that we've gotten from writers and creative people in other countries. There's been a lot of unity of standing together. One of the things they're kind of counting on, especially places like Netflix, which has such an international footprint, is we can just fill it up with shows from Korea. We'll put up 7 different versions of Squid Game or whatever. But obviously they want shows in English, for the American audience to watch. The American audience has a notorious bigotry toward anything that's in a foreign language, and somehow an inability to read subtitles. So they will, we're kind of relying on writers from Canada and from the UK and from Australia, sort of not to scab during this labor action, and to be sympathetic to the situation, because again, whatever happens here in Hollywood will trickle down throughout the industry. In fact, somebody from Apple was interviewed and said that very thing, is that the reason that they feel they have to hold the line on paying the writers more and giving them better participation in the back end and blah, 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 and more commitments to hiring more writers and all that, is that if that happens here, well, then the writers they're working with in other countries will ask for the same thing. And that's just, intolerable to them in terms of their, the profits that they expect and desire. So, we're fighting for everybody.
Definitely. When I was in New York in September, November, I can't remember, there was a big protest. It's about time protest, because productions weren't hiring. People felt that they were being forced to go to work, especially during that COVID period or this sort of burnout mental health period. And there weren't enough standby stage managers or standby performers and all this sort of stuff. And I said to one of the stage managers at that rally, I said, what happens here in New York is absolutely going to affect live performance in Australia. So that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, and we're living in a time of very exciting labor action. I mean, there's a lot of labor stuff going on here in the United States. Our UPS drivers are about to go out on strike, and we've had unity at some of our marches with the janitorial staff that work on these studio lots and in the buildings around them. They're out there with their orange vests on, marching with us, and in support. I've never seen so much unanimity, except for the fucking directors, in the entertainment community, from the crew folks and the Teamsters and just everybody, and the actors, everybody up and down the line. Now we'll see if it bears out in terms of their voting, but I've had a very good career. I've done well and been extremely lucky, and I'm in the third act of whatever this career is that I've enjoyed. The concern here is for the younger people. I mean, when I'm out on the picket line, you ask about talking to people. It's like, the truth is, in a lot of cases, there's some extremely young people there that have no idea who I am. And I'll occasionally see somebody with a mop of gray head or a head with no mop whatsoever, who I know. But the bulk of the people that are really agitating and really aggressively carrying the ball on this strike are young people who are just getting started. Many of them much more diverse than the generation with which I came into the business. And, those opportunities have been presented in recent years, much greater diversity. It's always been a business that prized youth, but, there's a new generation, and they are coming to this with an attitude of respect for labor that maybe past generations, haven't in this business and in this country. So I don't know. I mean, I'm going to be fine one way or the other, but I'm really, I'm out there for the younger people, for the next generation, because I want them to have some semblance of the great experience I've had. I've loved writing television. It's the greatest thing in the world to sit in a room with 7 or 8 other funny people and kick around ideas and try to come up with a story and then write the dialogue and stuff and do it in a group situation, and to be lavishly paid for it. And they bring you snacks and meals. It's been a good run. And, I want that for the next generation. I want them to have the same good experience. I don't want them to just be gig workers who are punching a clock and barely eking by and having to work at some other side gig in order to pay their bills.
We'll discuss more about the strike later, so we can go ahead now and move on to the musical. Aaron picked A Slice of Saturday Night. So before hitting the dance floor, Matt, you reviewed the musical this week. What did you think of this little-known show?
I'm sorry, do you guys know this musical? Have you seen this musical before or heard of it?
No idea.
Never heard of it.
This one has been pulled out of the trunk and dusted off. Is that because Aaron has hit them all and now he's really scraping the bottom of the barrel? Or is this an esteemed musical that I'm just not familiar with because I'm from the United States and this originated in the UK?
So I believe Aaron tried to hit one that both Matt and I didn't know, and that is something that is pretty difficult. So I think he just pulled it out of a trunk somewhere.
No, it's definitely a West End musical, and I mean, we can talk a bit about. In fact, I wanted to ask you a bit more about this, both of you, what your opinion is about. Yeah, like West End musicals tend to be own thing at times, and sometimes they're popular here in Australia, but not so popular in America. Like We Will Rock You, Ben Elton's We Will Rock You was a huge hit over here. I don't think it's really been a big hit in America.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it played briefly in Vegas.
They did a tour here. Yeah, they did a tour here for.
I saw it in Vegas. They did a cut down version that was like 90 minutes and
yes.
Stuff. But again, it's just a jukebox musical.
Yes. So, which brings me, thank you for that lovely segue, Jim, because that brings me into the review that I've written. Because I've always been somewhat troubled by jukebox musicals, especially my sworn enemy Jersey Boys. I just have never warmed to that show, because I just don't want to hear Broadway performers recreating classic songs that I've enjoyed by the original artists. Call me old-fashioned. But now I know, with A Slice of Saturday Night, that what gets me even more upset is a pastiche musical, especially one about the 60s. Yes. So I can't say that the musical stylings of A Slice of Saturday Night are not clever, giving us tastes of The Seekers, The Beatles, Sonny and Cher, Hand Jive, Hokey Pokey, the list goes on. And these are not subtle copies. Riffs of popular tunes are ripped off nearly exactly. Oh So Bad has the Love Me Do harmonica riff. There's a tribute to Cliff Richards in the song Cliff. Sentimental Eyes sounds like Leader of the Pack. If you had put into GPT, I want some 60s tunes, it sort of feels like it might have pumped out A Slice of Saturday Night. No disrespect to the Heathers brothers who wrote this, like to even write a musical. And this was a popular musical in the West End. It toured and came back to the West End. So I definitely never want to disrespect musical writers because it's impossible. And I've never written a musical, so good on them. But instead of classic songs, I mean, ultimately this reminded me of Shout, the Mod musical. I don't know if you heard that one, which had some really great, like, actual tunes from the 60s. And that's what I wanted, songs with lyrics that were clever enough to be remembered in popular music. But instead we got a song about Twiggy from a busty girl who wants her only bits to stick out to be her knees, her elbows, her shoulder blades, or her hip bones. She laments about being an old-fashioned girl, meaning that she is normally shaped. And I don't think I can buy into that sentiment. I think it's parody. I suppose it is, but I didn't find it particularly funny. The kicker, however, was a song called P.E., which I realized early on was not going to be a song about physical education. And it's not. It's about a boy who cannot control himself when he meets a girl at the dance, and then he gets close to her and premature ejaculation. It got me wondering about the difference between Broadway shows and West End shows. I've often found West End shows to be much more concerned about popularity and even commonality rather than sophisticated storytelling. And this one could be my master's thesis about this particular topic. Overall, I struggled to get through a dramatic storyline, which consisted almost entirely of whether guys and girls were going to hook up and get it on at a club on a Saturday night. I mean, I could go to a dive bar in Sarasota, Florida, and get as much drama. Did I mention here is a song about how it's not a proper Saturday night without a fight? Saturday night's all right for fighting, indeed. For me, this was 1 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, again, it would have been helpful if it's a show that I could see, and I actually went up and found some things on YouTube, briefly, and I saw some of the numbers performed on YouTube. There's what looks to be it doesn't look like a multi-million-dollar production. I'm not quite sure who did this production that's on YouTube, but it looks to be somewhat professional, somewhat amateur. I'm not quite sure the level of employment involved, but it didn't show the show off in the best light. As you say, it's pastiche, which basically means they're recreating the feeling of songs that are familiar, and the riffs felt familiar, and some of the songs were kind of cute. It was hard with some of the accents for me to hear how witty the lyrics were, but I thought that there was some sweetness and knowingness about what it's like to be 17 years old and to go out to a club to meet girls, or for girls to meet boys, certainly in a more innocent time. It's set, I think, in 1964, so there is a sweetness to that. There was an accessibility to a lot of that. There was some comedy, in some of that. The characters were broadly drawn, but yeah, I didn't ever hook into it as a story. It's, in addition to being sort of a pastiche of music, it's sort of a pastiche of story. It's kind of like some very familiar elements reassembled, and presented as if they were something new. But I look at a show like this because as something that could be very nicely produced in a small space for an amateur company. You could do this in a bar. I mean, you could basically clear off the dance floor in a little club and do a performance of this. And that kind of intimacy and proximity and, the reality of the setting, it might actually be fairly involving for an audience sitting at cabaret tables and watching these young people kind of sing about sex and getting together. So I'd be very curious what a scaled up production of this show looks like. I guess you could throw $10 million at it and do it on Broadway with a cast of 40 and amazing lights and a full orchestra. But it probably would be good, pouring good money after bad. Ultimately, I don't think there's enough of a show there for this to be something that people would really get excited about. But in a modest setting, with modest aspirations and, talented singers up close, I think it could be a fairly enjoyable evening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's fair enough. And I think it does get done a lot by amateur societies and universities and things. In fact, the university I just worked for is doing something next term that has Saturday night in the title. And I'm now curious if it might be this one.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, like, there's a lot of fun to be had.
Yeah, there's a need for shows like that. Every show shouldn't be a multi-million-dollar extravaganza, because it's sort of like the way the movie business has gotten inflated with Marvel movies and stuff. Everyone's watching the box office every weekend, because if the film that they just produced doesn't open to $75 million, then they'll never get back their $200 million investment. Well, the same thing happens. And I think, Spencer, you might be able to speak to this more about the current Broadway situation, but there's a certain amount of overblownness to musicals, especially now. The scale of something like in New York, they have New York, the musical, which just opened. I think we're getting Back to the Future, which is coming into us from England. Especially, you talk about the difference with West End, Matt. They seem to, there's not a movie from the last 50 years that somebody on the West End hasn't said, hey, that could be a musical. We've had Pretty Woman and we've had Mrs. Doubtfire and again, some of them originate here, some of them, but it seems like there's a lot of them in the UK. And then some of them make it over and some of them don't. So it's the exact problem that the movie business has, which is, everything is sequels and reboots of the familiar. I mean, this New York that's in New York right now, and again, speak of it if you've seen it, it has nothing to do with the Martin Scorsese movie, or very little to do with the Martin Scorsese movie, but it recycles that song and some of the attitudes and the setting, from that movie. So they think we'll trick people who were fans of that movie from whatever, 1980 or whatever year it was. We'll trick them to come to spend $500 a seat to come and see our show on Broadway. And we'll give them this other thing, which may or may not work, but certainly has nothing to do with it. The use of IP, the exploitation of IP as an excuse to spend money and as a backstop to losing the tons of money that these things lose is kind of a failed venture.
Well, and what's interesting though about what you're saying though is we've seen it where they become hits and we've seen it where they don't. A great example is Life of Pi, which is IP, didn't do well on Broadway. They won 3 Tony Awards and still are closing a month and a half after the Tony Awards. And sometimes it works. I mean, look, even something that's like broadly IP. Wicked is broadly IP. Like that's something that, it's based off The Wizard of Oz. It's based off of a book. That's something that obviously it's been running for 20 years. You have a show like Mean Girls that did very well. I think Back to the Future will do very well. I know I, for one, am very excited for it. Then you have a show like An Almost Famous. That's a very beloved movie that didn't do well. It closed after a month. And so I think, especially on Broadway, they're starting to see that those IP-based things are much more of a risk here than doing a sequel or a remake of a movie is.
But it's all IP. I mean, all of those things, whether it's a sequel or a remake. Again, to me, it's sort of like one of the charming surprises of this Broadway season was Kimberly Akimbo, which is not a huge show. I think there's, 8 people in it or something. I mean, it's not a massive show. And there you go. And the scale of it is...
I've seen it 6 times. It's my favorite.
Okay, good. Well, then you know more about it than I do. But I was delighted by it. I thought it was great. My wife loved it. She saw it. She dragged me to it. I went reluctantly, but I was totally won over by it. It's a weird concept. I guess it's based on the prior version of a straight play that the playwright wrote, but it's good. And it's, it's analogous, I think, in a way to the kind of modest scale that, getting it back to our topic, that A Slice of Saturday Night sort of aspires to, that you can do a show that doesn't promise a panoramic discussion of New York in the 1940s with all the characters and all the things and the noise and construction workers and a set that wouldn't believe. Or there's ways to do this and please an audience and that don't rely entirely on spectacle and familiarity. A Slice of Saturday Night I don't think is good in that respect, but I think there are ways to do it. And the talented people behind Kimberly, I think, proved that this season. And I was very heartened to see, its success. Again, is it successful? I guess it's doing well, probably doing better now than Tony's.
Yeah, it won 5 Tony Awards, including Best Musical.
But is it making money?
They are now making money. They were not before.
Right.
But now they're now making a lot more money than they were.
And that's the value of the Tony Award.
Yeah, and that's a whole other thing with the strike as well, that impacted the Tony Awards. Obviously less than people originally. There were not going to be Tony Awards. So the fact that there were at all is something that I know myself in the industry are very thankful for.
Yeah, and they did a good show. I mean, we were spared all writing jokes for an award show is not what skilled writers aspired to when they were dreaming of one day, creating work for television and the films. I think everyone was happy that they didn't have a lot of cutesy banter between awkward celebrities up there. They just banged from award to award, and they let the singing and dancing sort of tell the story. I mean, obviously there were some clunky things and stuff, but it felt very human. I think it was a success as an award show. And I hope people don't say, aha, we don't need writers. It's like, well, yeah, award shows are one thing, but try doing an episode of Grey's Anatomy without writers.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I think was interesting with the Tony Awards was, I know I was in a bar full of theater fans who we all saw every show this season. So we were talking about how the performances and how great they were. And then we were like, wait, the performances aren't for us. We aren't the judge of whether the performances are good. They're for people who aren't already buying tickets to these shows. We had already seen all these shows. We're going to buy more tickets to these shows. The performances, whether they work or not, has to do with whether the normal public who is watching buys tickets to those shows. And especially for a show like Kimberly, it needs it.
Yeah, and the Jodie Comer show now has gone into profit. I think as a direct result of her, getting a Tony Award and that kind of stuff. I mean, no, that's why the Writers Guild relented. Initially, the writers said, no, you can't cross the picket line. You can't do the show. We're gonna pick it if you do the show, and hopefully your craftspeople will respect the picket line. But then they relented because they're sympathetic to the actors and they're sympathetic to the economics of Broadway, and so they made an exception in this case, which I think was well reasoned. I think everyone was happy that it played out that way.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, Matt, you were talking about how you don't like a pastiche, but you just performed in The Producers, which is essentially a pastiche, right? I mean,
yeah. Okay, fair enough.
I think you don't like this kind of pastiche,
yeah.
I mean, what do you think of Grease?
Grease is very cute.
I mean, Grease has some pretty cute songs in it, but but I think maybe there's more wit to the songs in Grease than there are to this particular thing.
Yeah, well,
but yeah, I mean, pastiche is just sort of, a way of kind of honoring a style that you enjoy and imitating it. But obviously there's levels of skill involved. And the people who did Grease and obviously Mel Brooks and his collaborators doing The Producers, they brought it to a level of skill and entertainment that, I mean, The Producers is like this compendium of 20th century comedy. It's got, every kind of gag in it, I mean, all just like sight gags and spit takes and just kind of, it's this blend of vaudeville and burlesque and oogling the hot the assistant and jokes about the showgirls, and it has this very retro feeling to it. And you could take that show and put it in a spaceship and send it to outer space, and it would teach some foreign intelligence a lot about what people in the 20th century in America thought was funny. It might not. It might not make them think well of us and spare us from invasion, but they would learn a lot about especially sort of the Jewish humor coming out of New York, from the 1920s, through the end of the 20th century, all that wonderful kind of Your Show of Shows, stuff that guys like Brooks were involved in. And So I think it's a wonderful show, very, very enjoyable show. And I saw it several times with various different casts.
Yeah, it's great. I saw it in LA as well with Jason Alexander and Martin, which was very funny.
It was very shticky. The night I was there, the two of them were really milking their gags. I think Martin Short was doing this whole bit about like getting up off the couch where he got slid onto the floor. I bet by the time they were done touring with it, those two had added 15 minutes to the show.
I'm sure.
Just with the sticks and the takes that they added along the way. That's what they say when Zero Mostel was doing Fiddler on the Roof, the show got padded just thicker and thicker. He added like 20 minutes to the show just with all the, the business that he created along the way, or I guess not Fiddler. I think, was it Fiddler or was it Funny Thing Happened the Way before? Anyway, yes. So when set out on a tour, these guys will often go a little nuts with these shows and beat the hell out of them.
Yeah, but it's interesting though, getting back to the writing, because again, like Thomas Meehan wrote the book with Mel Brooks, and it's so precise, and it runs for it like with Susan Stroman production runs for 2 hours and 40 minutes with a 20-minute interval, and there's not a second to spare. And we had a similar thing happen where our show got padded out a little bit by performers being a bit indulgent, and there was one night during the commercial run of it in Melbourne, which was the Susan Stroman production, where we didn't do the playoff because the musicians put down their instruments because they hit the 3-hour mark.
Wow.
And that was a big problem, obviously, because we didn't finish the show. Yeah, so you do have to respect those writers. And and it's interesting that you brought up Grease when we were just talking about a slice of Saturday Night. And I'd be interested to know if there is even a book in this, or if it just moves from number to number to number. Because Grease actually, for what it's worth, like it's exposition, like in that first scene between the alma mater leading up to Summer Nights, there's so much information in there, and you have to it's like an 8-minute scene, and it has to be done precisely and with pace because people want to get to that first number. So that's so interesting. And writers are just in musical theater are so precise, and every word and every bit of punctuation is so precise in a musical.
The discussion about musicals is always, does the song forward the plot or does it stall the plot? I mean, and that's true in all sorts of writing. You can have funny bits that you write into a half-hour sitcom, and you end up having to cut it later because it kills the momentum of the scene. You can't move forward. But it's especially a problem in a musical. I mean, you've got to have the songs, be this thing that propels the show forward, as opposed to, people looking at their watch for 20 minutes, while they wait for this big number to end. And depending on your mood, sometimes, I mean, I don't know, sometimes if I watch an old musical like Hello Dolly, or that thing got so overblown. I mean, just every tiny number in that show ended up being a 20-minute production number with a cast of thousands and people, doing somersaults and jumping in the air, or Oliver. The numbers just expanded and expanded when they made these movies, because they felt like at the time, well, we got to give people something big, because they're going out to the movie theater to see these shows. And you watch them now on your little home screen and you think, okay, kind of move, you start pushing the fast forward button sometime, depending on the show. There's a skill to writing these things. I've never written one, but I know a lot of people who have. I mean, my wife worked on a show with the guy who wrote this current play, the one about corn. I haven't seen it yet. Spencer?
Shuck. Huge fan.
I forget the writer's name. Oh, good. He's a sitcom writer.
Robert Horn.
So he moved from sitcoms to theater, and he's having a great time doing that stuff.
I mean, and if any of our listeners listen to my other podcast, and the EGOT goes too, they know that I'm a sucker for a good book in a musical. So many of these shows, my one problem with them is their book. The script just doesn't work with the songs. Shucked is my favorite book of the season. Sorry, Kimberly Kimbo. It's so incredibly funny. Kimberly Kimbo's my second favorite, but I love that show. It's so great.
Yeah, Kimberly Akimbo, for those who haven't seen it, I mean, they pull off a magic trick here, because it's a story about a person who's got an illness. I mean, spoiler alerts. And the implication at the very end of it is that she's going to die. And that as you ride through this story. But that's kind of what's hanging over the whole story. And they pull off a magic trick. They make it a happy ending. It feels really happy when you go out of the theater. And I can't even fully explain how they do it, but they did it. They do it really well. For that, I give them plaudits. But I haven't seen Shucked yet. But I'll probably get dragged to it at some point during our next New York visit.
I love that it's a sitcom writer, and that's because when I teach my acting students as well, my music theater students, I do talk about sitcom and about television and the similarity to musical theater in terms of the energy that that is brought to both of them and the pace. Yeah, and so I haven't seen Shucked. I'm really curious about it, and now I'm even more curious now that I've heard about the book And that's a sitcom writer that's brought it. Maybe that's the marriage made in heaven, is sitcom and musical theater.
It's a joke a second. It's so funny. And it's because the story is simple. They're not trying to sell oh, this thing happens, this thing, oh my God, so dramatic, blah, blah. No, it's a story about family and love and friendship and corn, and that's it.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of that kind of storytelling has fallen out of the television and movies recently. I mean, one of my pet peeves, one of my beefs, is the fact that sort of our laugh out loud comedies that I have been involved in and then continue to work on have kind of fallen somewhat out of fashion. They're viewed as being old fashioned because they have jokes, because someone in character comes in and says something, funny. That is viewed a lot of time as cheap now, and the tendency has been to leave the comedy up to the personalities of the improv trained actors who come and inhabit the roles on these half-hour television shows. So I find a lot of comedy, so-called comedy television and comedy movies, to be actually comedy-like, that we could hardly describe them as a comedy. I mean, they're very good, and they're good stories, and they're interesting, and the actors are all skilled. But I like a good laugh out loud comedy. I like one where the goal is to make people really laugh and forget their troubles. I'm not saying that I like that exclusively. I have a lot of respect for all sorts of storytelling. Like this weekend, we have this Jennifer Lawrence movie opening up here. I don't know if it's opening over there too.
I'm very excited for it.
Right. And again, I don't know Jennifer Lawrence. I don't know the guy. He's a sitcom writer, the guy who wrote the people who wrote it, but I don't know them personally. I don't have any money in this thing, but I'm rooting for it. I want that to succeed. I want to see, the time was you would go to the movie theater and you'd see a lot of comedy, and comedies have fallen out of the movie, and comedy's fallen off of TV. I mean, there are only a handful of sitcoms on network television now, and maybe 2 or 3 of them are good. There are very few that are really strong anymore, and it used to be one of the mainstays of television. But the fashion seems to have changed, and especially with these streaming services, they have to look to the international audience, and a lot of time comedy doesn't travel as well as a cop show or a lawyer show or a doctor show or whatever. A grim procedural, a murder show will travel better. You can sell it to other areas of the world more easily than a idiosyncratic comedy based on the mores of people living in New York or Los Angeles. So the tendency has been away from that. And the comedies that do get produced a lot of time are what a lot of us, they're kind of grounded in misery. They're grounded in unhappy people. Somebody's wife just died, or somebody's recovering from an abusive relationship, or blah, blah, blah. There's this tendency to give them this dark underbelly of tragedy, so that they can kind of, the feeling is that gives the story more depth and credibility. But I don't know. I mean, if I get pitched another story about a guy who's got a dead wife, it's a cheap trick to me a lot of the time to make the main character sympathetic. His wife's dead and he still loves her, and that's why the audience is rooting for him to get back on that wagon and start dating again, or whatever. Or he's struggling to raise the kids on his own, or what. I mean, there are 50 of those out there on TV right now. Guys with dead wives, or wives with dead guys. But there's that kind of thing becomes an element that feels classy and grounded and dramatic, and gives you places to go in the storytelling that are have more drama and stuff. And I don't know, I miss I like What We Do in the Shadows, which is a bunch of goofy vampires living in a house together. I love that show. I just can't get enough of it. And those Matt Berry, that guy, he's just everything he does, he just cracks me up. I like that kind of thing. Again, not exclusively, but I'm just saying I don't want to slam any specific shows, so because whatever, I might need a job. But that's the kind of thing that I gravitate more toward, and that I wish there was more of in TV and in movies. So Jennifer Lawrence, make money this weekend, do really well, try to teach these boneheads that a comedy can succeed, so that everything isn't people in spandex going and shooting electric bolts out of their hands and eyes at each other, and fighting, and so much fucking spandex and blue lightning bolts coming out of people's hands. and they all have father problems. They all have daddy issues. My dad died unfairly. My dad was a scientist who turned me into a monster. My dad, it's like, I'm just enough of that.
And so kind of related to what you're saying, to move on to some of our additional questions.
G'day listeners, Aaron here. While you're topping up your coffees, did you know that you can support our show and go on a fantastically scary adventure at the same time? Go to www.thetonistonTales.com/bookstore to grab your copy of The Toniston Tales, a darkly funny Aussie trilogy about a young boy who rescues injured animals in his spare time and the roller coaster ride he's taken on by a literal fish out of water. Written by me, the village idiot of Thrash and Treasure, you'll come to love Toniston Turnbull and the dozens of wacky characters that he meets along the way. And here is a sneak peek. Landing with a thud that echoes throughout the whole cottage, Toniston instantly rips off the manky shoes gifted to him by Milfred and tosses them into the corner behind a blue barrel. Without a second thought, the bully races down the hallway to the backmost room of the house and leaps behind his uncomfortable makeshift hay bed, then waits, and waits, and then waits some more, until finally, what seems like an eternity later, muffled growls start vibrating through the thin walls of Cubpaw's cottage. He tries to control his breathing, but his heart is racing way too fast. Toniston ducks down further. Nothing should be able to see him, but he can't be sure they won't smell him. The gruff growling grows louder. Toniston presses his ear against the cold, chipped, chalky wall. He thinks he can make out phrases like, "Where is it?" and "Give us the merge," though not much else. It's all too mumbled, and he's shaking too much. But it doesn't matter anymore. The front door of the cottage slams open with a harder, louder cracking thud than it ever had before. A dozen or so stomping footsteps enter. The cottage shakes uncontrollably as if it is as terrified as our friend the bully is. Toniston panics. He's trapped in a corner with a slew of sharks on his trail. He makes a sudden rash decision. Ripping aside the thick animal hide curtain, Toniston leaps through the small oval-shaped window head first, landing on a crate filled with hay sitting outside it. Mustering every ounce of manliness he has not to react verbally as he lands with a crunch on the sharp, pin-like hay. It pierces his skin in several places, but thankfully, in his panicked state, the bully becomes numb to the pain. Counting his blessings but not his chickens, Toniston struggles out of the crate by throwing his legs over and levering himself up, causing the coral underneath his feet to snap. He loses balance and tumbles. To describe the pain of tumbling face first down a steep hill of hard, sharp, deadly-shaped coral would require far too many swear words than this author would be allowed to publish, so let's just say it hurt. A lot. With one last somersault, Toniston's legs fly first over the cliff's edge. Crunch. His left hand grabs hold of the outmost jagged knob of coral. The stocky body of the 10-year-old child sways rapidly back and forth like some sort of death-defying pendulum. He gasps for air, or from shock, not even Toniston can tell. All he knows is above him a deadly coral cliff and deadlier sharks. Below him, larger, sharper coral under a sea of giant, sharp spikes of natural metal. His head throbbing and vision too blurred with bright red splotches to be able to see clearly for too long. His face is dripping with blood. It runs down his shirt front, tickling him in the process. But all he can do is swing there. It's moments like these that a boy really needs his mum. Unfortunately, while Toniston's life hangs in the balance, on Earth his life was, dishonestly, being celebrated by all at Gumbaya Primary School after news of the bully's disappearance had spread like wildfire through the tiny town, then onto the music industry before eventually reaching the wider world. Rock music fans, specifically those of Muzzletop, had flocked to the outskirts of Melbourne, leaving wreaths, band posters, and hand-drawn tributes to honour the missing son of their favourite singer. Although none of them knew the boy, many had seen him standing on the side of the stage of the band's concerts alongside Tina, Also, at the time of his disappearance, hundreds of the world's entertainment media lined the streets outside the school and, sadly, outside Tina's house. Wanting any word they could get their greasy hands on, the gossip came in thick and fast as snide, bored neighbors took it upon themselves to speculate and make up stories for their 5 minutes of fame. Inside the house, the phone ringing 10, 15 times a day from nosy TV stations, hounding the poor, terrified mother, there was no escape. And whilst Tina was never polite in her declination, still they persisted. "Call me again and I'll punch you in the nose," she promised. The school's principal, Mr. Patterson, had himself realized how cold and nasty it would look if Toniston Turnbull's former victims didn't at least pretend to mourn his disappearance. And thus, with an added paranoia of becoming a suspect, Mr. Patterson set out to overcompensate with memorials and dedications to the boy who touched all our lives with his love of animals. Mr. Patterson felt satisfied his school's image was intact. The largest memorial from the school came in the form of a service in the gymnasium. With every student, teacher, news reporter, and local police in attendance, Mr. Patterson sought to show the world just how much Toniston had meant to the school. The service would have made the bully puke. From the awful school choir butchering his least favourite songs, to the obnoxious releasing of the white doves, Mr. Patterson may have been satisfied his memorial service paid tribute, but Toniston is far too cynical for that. And yet, whilst hundreds of people sat on the cold plastic seats in the Gumbaya Primary School auditorium, not one person in attendance truly knew Toniston when he was around. But all alone, in her large house, the animals all shunned outside, Tina Turnbull sits with her umpteenth glass of wine, ignoring the umpteenth phone call from friends, fans, and family, but most sad of all, wondering, for the umpteenth time, what she could have said to her only child to have brought the two of them closer together. A now broken photo of Trent Turnbull and an infant Toniston, only hours after his birth, sits at her feet under the table. Tina simply doesn't care about the million tiny shards of glass cutting up her feet. She just wants her son back. And as if joined at the soul, while dangling from the lavender-coloured dead coral cliff face, somewhere in his head voice, Tina's cries are heard by the boy. His face scrunches up, but then it relaxes. I can do this. Grab your copy of The Toniston Tales from thetonistonTales.com/bookstore today. Hooroo!
To move on to some of our additional questions. When developing an idea for sitcoms, is it character that takes precedence over plot? I ask because it seems many of the longer-lasting, longer-running sitcoms had very thin plots, but very lovable characters that kept us watching.
Well, I mean, the plot is something that in my experience is episode specific. I mean, what I think you really want to do is create a setting with characters that's a place where people will want to spend time. Mm-hmm. That a group of people that the audience will want to invite into their house regularly, or they will go and visit with regularly on their television machine. So I think you have to be careful with too much plot and making things too complicated. I fall into that trap a lot myself because sometimes I'll want to contrive the situation to get to something super funny. So how do I get this guy on roller skates, in a windstorm holding a big piece of plywood? How can I, because I want him to get blown around and do physical, I mean, you're working backwards, like, from a stunt, like they used to do on shows like whatever, Laverne and Shirley or Lucy or something. Okay. We want her to that conveyor belt and we want her to have to deal with the chocolates or whatever, so plot will push you in that direction, but you use Lucy as an example, but she's also this great character. She was just beautifully framed character of this woman who's married to a guy in show business, and she wants to be in show business, and he doesn't want her to be in show business. And so anytime she encounters something or someone attached to show business, her eyes light up and she goes a little crazy, so she's going to sneak in in costume to get in on the stage of the of the Copa show that her husband Ricky Ricardo is performing in. She meets John Wayne, and then she wants to sidle up to him and flirt with him or something. I mean, the specific character gets you there. So yeah, it's mostly about character. But the question that's always asked in these situations is, well, that guy's not likable. Your main character isn't likable. How are we going to redeem this guy? So the concern is always about likability in the characters. And I think a lot of time that is a mistake, because to make characters likable so that people will see them as the centerpiece of a TV show, the tendency is to make them bland. Because when we think of likable people, we think of our friend who is easygoing and you want to go get breakfast? And sure, let's go get breakfast. That's not the guy who you want to star in a TV show. You want your friend to be George Costanza, who's like, never mind about breakfast. I just left a message on this girl's answering machine and I broke up with her, and I realized now I don't want to break up with her. So we got to break into her apartment and get that tape out of her answering machine. That's the guy that drives the sitcom. Jerry Seinfeld kind of stands there with a look on his face like, okay, whatever, let's go, and he goes with him and they have an adventure. But you need that Jason Alexander guy who's not likable, who's a jerk to drive your sitcom. So when you talk about character, that's what I like. Is I like writing characters who are going to really want things and they're going to want them a lot. And if you get in their way, they're going to go around you or through you because they're into it. That's the kind of character I like. And a lot of the time, the pushback will be like, oh, that guy's obnoxious. I don't want to see him. So you have to find the right balance, because I'm sure there are people out there that always hated the Jason Alexander character and didn't watch Seinfeld for that reason. So it's a balancing act between likability and characters who got an engine in them, a little bit of something in their belly to move things forward. Yeah. So to me, I guess I'm saying it's character, but I also think there's something about a setting. And when I turn on the TV and I don't know a show, if the setting is someplace that's pleasant and interesting, I'll sometimes stick around just for the art direction, at least for like half an episode. If it's like, oh, this is set in a bar in Boston, and these people seem to be having a good time hanging out together, or Friends, which is, a Fantasyland New York apartment with a bunch of, friends who seem to say very well scripted nonsense to each other. So I think it's important to craft a setting that's pleasing. A lot of the time I'll see a show and it looks bleak and it's supposed to be comedic, and I'm like, it's really hard for me to get over the hump of it. I don't want to hang out here. Sometimes the aesthetics become a problem. If there's some show set in Victorian England, even if it's kind of shitty, I'll give it a little more latitude than I normally would, because I like seeing guys in the hats and the women and the way they talked and all that kind of, Dickensian, Sherlock Holmesian kind of stuff that tickles me. So, and I'm sure there are aesthetic choices that other people are drawn to that cause them to give shows more latitude than maybe they should.
What you were saying about character work, especially with Jason Alexander, because he's making his Broadway debut as a director this season, directing a comedy with 5 very distinct, like sitcom tropey characters, and him as someone who played that character for so long. I'm really excited to see what he can do as a director in terms of these very distinct characters. I think that'll be really great.
I worked with Jason. I know him a little bit. I know he's doing this play this fall, but supposedly next spring he's doing a show in Chicago that a friend of mine wrote. He's going to act in. There's a theater company called the Chicago Theater or something that I guess is a fairly decent one. And my friend Rob Hewlin wrote a play, I think currently called Judgment Day, about a Weasley little lawyer who gets confronted by an angel and has a heart attack and has a near-death experience, and an angel confronts him about repairing his ways in order to avoid going to hell. And Hewlin is a buddy of mine, a sitcom writer, and he wrote this play, and it's getting a production. And Jason is at this point slated to star in it, I think, like next April. So if you're in Chicago at that time, you might check it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jason's very skilled. Again, Seinfeld would not have been Seinfeld without Jason Alexander. You cast some other, and that's always the danger with network television. You go in with your pilot and say, I want to use Jason Alexander. This guy, and they're like, he's short and he's bald and he's fat. Fuck that guy. You got to use John Stamos, to play Jerry Seinfeld's buddy. He's a good looking guy and he's got a high TVQ and everybody loves Stamos. And again, I know Stamos. He's a nice guy and he's talented, but I'm just saying, would that show have worked if they cast John Stamos as George Costanza? Having the funny little fat balding guy there as the engine on the shows made all the difference in the world. And whatever money Jason got for that, he earned, because he was carrying a lot of that show on his back. fact, yeah, he and Julie Louis-Dreyfus.
Well, I think that maybe A Slice of Saturday Night needs Jason Alexander. He can come in and play the Club Go-Go owner. And apparently, I mean, I've heard from Aaron that the script is actually very funny between the songs as well. So yeah, so that's interesting what you say about that likability, because I find Jason to be very likable, very likable, and I think that's possibly my neurosis. Like I loved New York because I loved sort of the energy of it, and matched with my Catholic guilt. It just all sort of plays into the likability of those characters that are so driven. In your show, The Kids Are All Right as well, the mother, like she's so like my mom. She's so driven. She just has to get through that day every day. And so sometimes what she comes out with, that actress is great.
If you guys, Mary McCormick, she's amazing.
There's lots of Irish Catholics in Australia as well. I'm married to one, so
yeah, I would think so. So I'd be curious if the show's playing there, because obviously, and there's money for me. That's a great example, because the character of the mom on that show, and again, people haven't seen it. I mean, it did fine, but I'm saying it's not a cultural touchstone. But I had a lot of fights with the folks at ABC about the mom, because I went extreme with her. I wanted her to be a difficult character, and they were like, "Well, she's a mom. She's got to love her children," and the fact that she says all these mean things about her children, and she smacks them in the head with in the back of the head with a wooden spoon while she's cooking, and then takes the spoon and then puts it right back in the food. There were lots of fights about that I had. And, it's part of the reason that the show isn't still on, is that I basically told the bosses to take a flying leap, with their notes, because I really wanted the show to be what it was. And part of that was a deeply flawed main character of this mother, who was, in some ways like my mother, but very exaggerated version of it. And I really wanted to put that on TV, and I didn't want her to be the perfect mom. I didn't want her to be, I wanted her to be a great and interesting mom, and a funny mom who would drive stories and make things happen. So, Mary McCormick is great. And if anyone listening to this podcast, you should check it out. The Kids Are All Right on whatever version of the Disney Plus thing you guys get over there. And then it's really quite good. I've worked on a lot of shows, and this one is very, very special. And it's also, based on very autobiographical. I have 7 brothers. I grew up in a big Irish Catholic family in Glendale, California in the 1970s. And we did a really good job of recreating a lot of that. And, and I spent Disney's money very well to do it.
Very familiar to me. I'm Polish Catholic. I'm not as many siblings, but one of 4, and my husband's of Irish Catholic of 5, and so we all sort of know what that was. And there was one line I was watching this morning. It was about just the parents saying, "Well, you don't even know, like we lived through the Depression," and this sort of stuff. And my mother's part of the family, the Polish Catholic side of the family, like it was like, "You don't know suffering." And I think that's funny. I think that's really funny. I'm like, yeah, because we didn't, because we were just these innocent kids growing up in the 70s who just everything sort of happened, and we did have dinner on the table every night, even though sometimes the dinner was liver with onions, which we didn't really want, but that's what was affordable at that time. Yeah, I mean, I love that sort of nostalgia.
Yes, I have very plain meat and potatoes taste because of the family I grew up in. My wife suffers for it. She's a foodie, and she likes lots of interesting food. And my mother wasn't a great cook, but she had to feed a troop of people. And so a lot of fish sticks and Campbell soup and hot dogs, and and that's still what I enjoy. It's maybe because it feels like love to me.
Yeah, lovely, nice.
Well, anyway, thanks for bringing up The Kids Are All Right. I'm excited for any opportunity to plug that show. It was a great experience, and I think if people watch it, they will enjoy themselves.
Looking at shows that that could be written sort of by this ChatGPT and AI. It's something that's being talked about a lot, and people are saying, oh, well, our performers and our writers going to get replaced by this. And I just think that, like, I love to write, like, just I've been writing for myself as someone who's been an actor for all his life. And I used to write a lot at NYU, and, got very good grades for it. And then I've started writing for myself, and I'm like, oh, it's even writing the director's notes for the show I just directed, which was called Song Contest, the Almost Eurovision Experience, which again was a pastiche show, and it was so pretty similar to A Slice of Saturday Night, I suppose, because it was, the jokes were in the songs, but then there was all the comedy in between. Do you reckon that there is any validity in this fear about AI or ChatGPT taking over comedy writing or writing in general?
Well, I certainly think that's something that they would like to happen. I mean, any version of simplifying the process for the bosses, for the people who run the studios and the networks and the streaming services, any version of them being able to push a button and getting a script without having to deal with the unpleasant arguing with me, they would love that. And it would obviously be faster and it's cheaper. But we're not there yet. The technology isn't there yet. From what I've seen so far, I think that the computers could write a credible procedural drama. You fed every episode of CSI something or other, or some Dick Wolf fireman show or cop show or something. If you fed them in there, they could probably generate something fairly credible that you could then clean up. But I haven't seen one tell a joke yet that would make me laugh. There's all sorts of things on the internet of like, oh, this is a Seinfeld episode written by CG. And it's like, no. That show was idiosyncratic and had a wonderful level of odd. So, it can only imitate it. It can't be fresh and original because the whole point is it's a machine imitating something else. I think the greater danger is actors. I think actors are going to be the first ones to get replaced because, actors, and production. The whole mechanics of production, that's the expensive and cumbersome part of making a show or a movie. The idea now, when you watch a Spider-Man movie or an episode of The Mandalorian, how much of what you're seeing is actually a guy in a suit doing a thing? How much of that is something? Obviously when Spider-Man is swinging through the streets and jumping through the air and stuff, that's CG, that's fake stuff. And then he lands on the ground and the guy's there. But and the Mandalorian, he always has that helmet on, because it's a little harder to get facial expressions. But I think they're going to replace actors and they're already doing it. I think they've got recorded voiceover voices that can do narration, that can do voiceovers. Tom Hanks was talking about this the other day, that basically it's going to get to the point where he walks in and they scan him up and down all over and they twist a few dials and they can decide what age he's going to be and he's going to sell his likeness and somebody's going to create a movie or a TV show starring Tom Hanks while he's sitting at home. I think that is imminent. I think that's something that's going to happen right away, which is, for my money, why the actors really should go out on strike and demand some protection from it. I don't think AI is on the verge of replacing what I do, but I may be naive. I do think, again, I'm going to have to look into it, but I do think it might be a helpful tool for somebody like me to, kick up some ideas for a story or something, to hear what the cliches are and maybe try to figure out a way to subvert them, not do the thing that the computer tells me. Because if the computer tells me this is where the story should go, then that probably tells me that that's the audience. That's what the audience is expecting as well. But that might be useful. But I'm not particularly frightened. It's not one of my big issues. I think the more important issues are a paying job that for as many writers as possible, and as a showrunner getting as much help as you can to run the show. Just staffing that last show that I ran, was a big fight. They had the writers they wanted me to hire, and I had writers I wanted to hire, and I'd never felt so much interference from the bosses before. I could not hire the people I wanted to hire. I ended up with good people, but it was a wrestling match. And they were limiting, how much they would pay them, and they came to people with insultingly low bids for their services, and all that. So from my point of view, those are the fights worth fighting. Is getting good people to help you make your TV show. That being said, if we're only doing 8 episodes, maybe I don't need 10 people to help me, but I could sure use 6, because it's when you're doing 24 episodes, then you need a lot of people, of horses to pull the wagon, and especially on you're going to do 24 episodes in a 10-month schedule, and that means you got to generate the scripts fast. You got to fix them. You got to get them on the stage. You got to shoot them. You got to edit them. You've got this big job you have to do as a showrunner, and you're working an 18-hour day easily. And so to have a lot of really talented people around you helping you, so when you're dead on your feet and half asleep, you have people there, that can you up. And if somebody's sick or somebody's got a problem with their kid, you have enough backup that that your writing staff is intact to limit a showrunner. But the work isn't proportionally reduced when you're only doing 8 episodes. It's not a third as easy as doing 24 episodes. You still have this whole world you have to create. You have to break these stories, and somebody has to supervise them and stuff. So to say, well, you have 10 people to write 24 episodes. So to write 8 episodes, we'll give you 4 people, or something. that is kind of bullshit. That's the kind of math that only a Silicon Valley nerd would come up with. It's an art, and you need people to help you. And what I'm hearing in some of these shows that are doing, where they have almost no staff, is that the showrunners, the show creators, are killing themselves, just killing themselves with the amount of work that they have to do all by themselves or with very little help. And of course, everyone's eager to be a showrunner, especially young people just starting out are like, I get to be a showrunner. I get to have my dreams up on the screen. So they're willing to basically get the shit beat out of them. But it shouldn't be that way, and especially when they're basically just exploiting them so that the executives and the stockholders can enjoy greater economic reward for the creative effort of these creative people. So that's my take on the AI of it all. I think that's not foremost in my mind. I think it's taken over the discourse to some extent, but it's not a thing that I'm sweating about. I'll almost be disappointed if we spend a lot of our capital in negotiations on that point. But but I'm not the only person who has to be serviced here in terms of this labor action.
Yeah, fair enough. That's interesting that you say about the writers and the actors, because we were just talking about rules of three a lot with this show that I just did, and in some of it it's Kurt Kohler, who's a sitcom teacher in LA, talks about apple tampon, where you expect someone to say apple, and then they say something completely unrelated, and that's that rule of three, and it has to do with rhythm, and it has to do with going up, and then going down. And so there is, and when you talk about AI being able to reproduce that for actors, I'm like, oh yeah, actually, there are some formulas in place there that with good writing that you could probably use a different voice.
But I love audience expectation. I mean, look, sitcoms get a bad rap. They're dumb sitcoms. They're, with canned laughter and blah, 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 and all this stuff. I've done single camera shows that don't have laughs, and I've done live audience shows that do have laughs. I've done both, a lot of both. And I always think that, that the multi-camera live audience shows get a bad rap, that they're much more like theater. They're much more like what Robert Horn is doing now. And it teaches somebody how to find that laugh, how to find that joke. Do they play a little broader than a low key single camera comedy? Sure, they often play a little broader, but the skills involved are massive. I mean, don't pretend that it's not a remarkable skill to write a good joke. Some of the people I've worked with over the years are geniuses. They're just amazingly talented people, and they've labored in the sitcom fields for a long time. And it's always so insulting to me when, it's just set up punchline, it's just jokes. It's like these people take it very seriously. I mean, look, there are hacks. There are people who are terrible, but the people I know and appreciate and hang with are very, very talented, and they'll, and if you pitch a hacky joke, they'll shoot you down. They'll tell you, they'll tell you it's terrible. The value of cliches and the kinds of very familiar things that the chat GPA blah 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 thing would do is it'll shows you where the cliches are, and your job then as a writer is to be creative and to subvert the expectation. That you don't necessarily hit the tampon thing, you do it a different way. Because if that's what is spit out by a computer, then the audience also knows that stuff, and you have a job to surprise the audience. Not to just give them something familiar, which so often is what I feel like entertainment is now. Is like, and again, a lot of time with these superhero shows and stuff, it's just fan servicing. It's like, oh look, the Darth Vader showed up. This thing I know. Oh look, this movie's got 3 Spider-Men in it. Oh, now there's 4. Oh, and there's they brought in an old Batman, and they I mean, it's giving people comfort food. And look, there's a place for comfort food. I mean, as I say, I eat a lot of junk, but I do feel like I feel scrupulous in my work about trying to startle and surprise and engage the audience, maybe to a fault. Maybe I'm working too hard, but it's one of the things that I find annoying about a lot of the comedies now is that they don't seem to be working hard enough to, at least in the spirit of trying to make me laugh.
And so before we finish up, Matt, do you have any questions for Tim?
Oh, I think I've covered most of them. Yeah, no, I'm pretty happy with. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to ask. Thanks.
I think this was very successful. You guys, again, you guys are great. and I enjoyed talking about this stuff. Obviously, I have strong feelings about a lot of these topics, so I'm more than happy to go on and on.
You had mentioned you saw a couple shows last season. We know you're a big fan of musical theater. What is a show that you walked in not expecting to enjoy and that just, swept you off your feet?
Well, yeah, you're talking about expectations. I think I have to go back a few years, but I remember going in to see the production of How to Succeed with what's his name, with Harry Potter in it.
Daniel Radcliffe.
And thinking, okay, I've seen How to Succeed a half dozen times. I saw the various versions of it, and not expecting much. And and he was great, and it was a sprightly, fun thing. So that's one that really knocked my socks off, just because I kind of went reluctantly and thought I knew what the show was, and didn't have big expectations for it. I'm trying to think of the current crop of things that I've seen recently. Obviously Hamilton, the first time I saw it was great. I knew it was going to be great though, so I didn't go in with lowered expectations. Musical theater. Well, Spencer, can you think of one that really just knocked your socks off?
Shocked. I walked in being like, I have no idea what this is going to be. It's a musical about corn. How good could it possibly be? And I walked out it being in the top 5 shows I've ever seen.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad you liked it. I'll have to check it out.
Okay, so we have one more question. Have you ever given a standing ovation that you didn't mean or that made you feel dirty?
I'm not a big standing ovation guy. I'm usually that guy who's sitting there kind of going, I mean, a lot of it is because I'm 6'5". So if I stand up, that means everybody has to stand up behind me. And I feel bad about that. So I usually am one of the last people to stand. And my wife or my daughter will look at me like I'm being ingracious, but I'm like, I just, out of consideration for the other people, I don't want to stand up and block somebody's view all the way back. But you're saying, so a show that like other people loved and I didn't love quite as much.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't love Kinky Boots. I mean, I'm trying to remember what I didn't love about it. I don't have a ready critique of Kinky Boots, but I remember everybody being very jazzed about it and kind of going, it's fine, and yes, and only basically standing up because I had to, because the people in the row were already fighting their way to get past me to the aisle, so I had to stand up just to make room for their legs. But that would probably be an example. Oh, one of the shows I really loved this season was Leopoldstadt. I like that a lot. It has a straight play. It's not a musical, but I just, I enjoyed it a great deal. Enjoy is a hard word for a show about the Holocaust, but I liked it. I thought it was very well done. Tom Stoppard and the cast, and just a lot of good words, a lot of really, interesting, vivid characters talking about important, smart things. It was a pleasure. My wife didn't like it as much, but I liked it a lot.
Well, and connecting that show back to you, Josh Molina is in that show right now, who worked on Sports Night. Yep,
and he replaced David Krumholtz, who was in the show when I saw it. And David and I go back to a show called The Trouble with Normal that we did at Paramount years and years ago. And I know David a little bit, so I talked to him afterwards. He was very nice, and we talked after that. But I know Josh too. Both really talented guys.
So before we go, where can we find you online, Tim?
Find me online on Twitter. Oh, you like on Twitter? What is my Twitter? Oh, my Twitter handle is @FlakedAndFormed. Which it's not. There's not even an interesting story behind it, but it's Flake, FLAKED, and AND, formed, FORMED. That is my Twitter handle. So you can certainly check me out there if you want. You can hear my weird rantings and sad attempts at collegiality and comedy.
And do you have anything that you're currently working on that you'd like to plug? Well, no, because you're on strike.
Yes, I'm working on things that I hope to present in a big blob after the strike. We'll see what happens, knock on wood.
And Matt, where can we find you?
You can find me at Matt Young Actor. Matt, my first name with 2 T's, Young. I'm not old, an actor. That's what I do when I'm not directing or hosting podcasts. And that's across all social medias, at Matt Young Actor.
And you can find me on Twitter at SpencerSher, SHER_. You can also listen to all episodes of And the EGOT Goes To, streaming wherever you listen to podcasts. We just finished discussing, breaking down, predicting this year's Tony Awards and discussing this entire Broadway season. Yeah, thanks so much, Tim. This was really great.
It was a pleasure. Take care.
Thanks, Tim. It was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
We shall see you all next time.
Hi, Aaron. How did we do? I'm sure you can pare this down to a nice 20 minutes.
Like quicksand!